Some of the stories are fairly obvious to you. You know, the love that Karen Estrada shows to her rooster Cotton is very touching. When my students see this film, they're inclined to be patronizing toward her, and they say, "Oh, you know, what a silly woman! It's a good thing that she's not in a mental hospital behaving like this." But in fact, as I remind the students, the sense I have watching her is that she knows perfectly well that she's putting on a performance, and that, like the filmmakers, she's winking. There's a kind of sly, ironical self-awareness there. And so, in effect, she's selling happiness. She's deliberately trying to arouse and uplift morale. So, in that sense of the word, her role is more like play. And play allows you and I, watching the film, to be exploratory, to be experimental, without necessarily being committed to a point of view that would frighten us, would close us up defensively, or anger us, make us scapegoat or blame the filmmakers. They have no business to be showing this film any more than Lloyd Olson had any business to let that rooster whose head had been cut off live. Remember those scolding letters, the threats that they'd received? Because the material, and this gets back to one of Becker's basic points later in his life, the material is really threatening. If we were not unconscious, we would actually be potentially rattled by the reminder, not only that there is death and that we're all going to become acquainted with it sooner or later, but also that the very meaning of the cultural consolations that we rely on are always up for grabs. They're always in question. Generations pass, cultures come, cultures go. Laws come into being, they disappear. Religions come into being, religions disappear. So at this point, Becker comes to the conclusion that humans end up having to continually stay in a creative mode. Looking for heroic purpose to make it worthwhile getting up and on a Thursday rainy morning, and conducting life in a way that will make for the maximum amount of health and satisfaction and warmth and value investment for you and the people you know, and for ultimately the planet. And here's the part that's so relevant to what the Becker conference this week is about. The attempt here is to talk about the environment and ecology. And if you think about it, this film doesn't simply stop with the local, human, personal, provincial dilemma that, oh dear, I kiss, I love, but I also bite, chew, and eat other creatures. It goes farther than that. It's actually reminding you that these are characters, these are humans' voices that are in some ways trapped in nature like the rest of us. And so, for example, consider the pastor in that final vignette. He's playing the role of father, lover, rescuer, St. George to his ideal mother, Liza the chicken. But if you notice, when the hawk arrives on the scene and goes after Liza, the pastor wants to imagine that somehow this is the proof of his particular interpretation of the universe, and that this should set your mind at ease, that we finally have arrived at a satisfactory demonstration of nobility and values that can orient feelings and philosophy once and for all. The problem is that what he's not taking into account is that in this particular vignette, there is a mother hawk who is going to fly home to her nest with no food, and all her little kids are going to die. And before they die, they're going to say, "Mom, you abandoned us. You didn't bring back any chickens." So, the world of the storytelling is constantly framed in this film by implied larger stories. In that case, you're looking at a larger story in which ecology, all the things in nature are interrelated. And somehow or another, In order to live in that world without destroying it, we have to get to know all of those players, all of those living things well enough not to disturb the balance of things such as would create a desert waste, so that we don't end up exterminating and leaving barren the planet that we hope to be fertile and creative with. So in that sense, I think the film is trying to open your mind in directions that ordinarily it's very hard for us to go, because we want the world to be user-friendly. Without that ability to make the world respond to not only our needs, but also respond to what we perceive to be its needs, then we're in tragic trouble. At that point, let me invite you to make some comments, because I'm sure you have lots of insights into what we just saw.
Well, what do you propose we do about the situation?
Well, we're already doing it, in a sense. You're doing it by dropping in on this film. I'm doing it by dropping in via Alaska Airlines on this film. As we're sitting here, we're trying to understand the situation we're in. And we're trying to do it in a way, for example, there are no utensils, and there are no little creatures we can kill in the room. We're trying to turn the problem into an emotional and intellectual problem that criticism can handle, that we can try to understand and work through. So that's one somewhat glib but practical answer.
Okay, well, some people don't eat chickens and some people don't eat eggs. So are they better than the rest of us, or in your opinion? Or?
Well, in order to stay alive, you're killing and eating something, even if it's grass. I haven't tried grass, but you never know. In a sense, the problem can be modified. It can be modulated, but it can't be eliminated. And the fact, it would still remain that we are the creatures we are. We're partly rational and symbolic creatures, but we also share a great deal of our DNA with not only other primates, but also other higher forms of life, like the banana, which has many of the same genes we have. The whole point in a sense of evolution is the point in the film that all things in being are connected. And to begin, the minute you start appreciating that, you begin to see that it takes the mind to an ultimate framework of thought where it's very hard for us to process. It takes the mind to a state of wonder or amazement or madness if it doesn't go well. Yeah.
One thing I was thinking about during this film is I was trying to count how many of our sexual metaphors are based on chickens. There's the cock, there's the hen, there's the chick, there's the hen house, there's ruling the roost, there's all this kind of stuff that...
Mouth to beak resuscitation.
There we go. So that was, at least for me, that was another sub story in the film.
Mm-hmm. And the film, one of the nifty things is that it shows you how closely related these behaviors are once you get beyond the structures of culture to dangerous territory. Because kissing, as I say, involves the same parts of the body as biting, chewing, and killing. Mm-hmm.
Thinking about your framing this as a problem, the death, killing, eating, defecating as a problem, it seems to me that but maybe the problem is anthropomorphizing and personification of things that are not human, that are not personal. And that we have this tendency to do that so that we can see these chickens as an extension of ourselves, and our morality around protecting our own species is projected out. Mm-hmm. And if you're a farmer, you've learned to control that. And as a child, in fact, you often hear these stories of a farmer telling their son to go kill the pigs or silence the lambs or something, go kill the lambs or something, to overcome that. So I'm wondering if part of our problem is this universal, almost, at least in our culture, maybe everywhere, to personify and anthropomorphize within the stories we tell, and then rarely to sort of deconstruct that. On a daily basis we don't.
But
I have a micro comment, maybe you can respond to it. Just
Sure.
the function of the rainbows that appear many times in the film.
Yeah, the film's full of euphemisms that want to console you for what you're seeing. The question you're raising is, in a sense, a meta question, about whether or not we're personifying or anthropomorphizing nature. I mean, to some extent, I think to explore that, we would want to raise the problem that it's the way we're built. It's almost impossible not to think in these personified terms. Not because we're intellectually lazy necessarily, though we often are, but simply because it's the way we're built. This is what Lakoff and Johnson mean when they talk in that magisterial and beautiful book called Philosophy in the Flesh. They point out that all of the basic terminology and concepts we use to conceive reality are based on the fact that, for example, we're living in a world in which gravity pulls you down, and as it were, the escape from the body and from mortality and human limitations takes you up. And for example, houses very often are built with slanted roofs. Well, it's not for aesthetic reasons, it's because you want rain to be shed from your dwelling and go into the ground. So the argument from this point of view in cognitive science would be that the way we think is a function of our organismic being, the way we're designed. And we didn't ask to be designed this way. This is the way we find ourselves. So in a sense, we're in midstream having to devise language and having to devise metaphors, having to devise criticism that can try to relate the stories and the limited devices we have for talking to the complexity of the reality around us. If you think about it, one of the interesting things about the industrial factory scene that always disturbs and rattles my students whenever I've shown this film, and understandably so. It's very frightening because it's depersonalizing, it's dehumanizing, the conditions create intense aggression among the confined animals and so forth and so on. At the same time, if you were to think about it in a non-anthropomorphic way, it would be entirely possible to see this as an efficient reality that we need in order to stay alive. So that anthropomorphizing from one point of view is incredibly naive and childish. From another point of view, it is inherently moral. It does, in fact, convey a vision of the world in which our deepest values are invested. But, as you point out, and I think quite absolutely shrewdly and rightly, it's in itself not a conclusion you can come to. It has to be a subject of criticism. But this is only to say that we ourselves have to be a subject of criticism. The question that it comes down to in the end is, what kind of creatures are we?